Angelos Stefanis, Director of Biggin and Scott, Elsternwick. Thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
Anthony, I'm well, and thank you for having me.
Good. Angelos, tell us about the property market, how you're finding it out there in your neck of the woods.
Of course, Anthony. Well, as everybody would be aware, there's obviously challenges right now under these unique circumstances that we all find ourselves in. However, I'm pleased to say that we are still doing deals. As I was just discussing with a few colleagues just before we came in here, I've got 2 deals on the go today.
Yep.
And if things come together as I expect they will, I expect those to be finalised before the close of business today.
Yeah,
so
beautiful.
we're still seeing activity.
Yeah.
Definitely the quantity of inquiries has decreased, but we are finding that the quality of the inquiries is probably as strong as it ever has been, if not even more so now, because we're finding that the qualified buyers are the ones that are seeing this as a great opportunity to get into the market.
Yeah, I'm glad because I see that I'm seeing that in our end of the market as well. So what's the biggest hurdle that you're coming up against? What's at the moment in your space?
Well, I think for at least the vast majority of people, probably uncertainty right now. Just if not confusion, just of course what the future holds. And the vast majority of people, again, are probably a bit too focused on what's happening in the here and now, and not looking at the big picture, and obviously realising that, sure, we're in, as we said, unique times, and under circumstances that we haven't found ourselves specifically in before. But I think if you're a student of history or you're just a pragmatic and an optimistic person, you realise that we will get through this. The government's doing all manner of things to try and minimise the impact. And I can see a way forward.
So tell me about this, what do they call it? The landlord and tenant stimulus package, is that right?
Yes, that's right. So the state government basically, I think it's a $500 million package, I believe, and again, all the details are widely available. I think it's $420 million for landlords, another $80 million for tenants. And the crux of it, I believe, is that if the landlord and tenant agree on some rent relief, that landlords can qualify for a 25% discount on their land tax and also defer the payment of the rest of the land tax up until, I think, the end of March 2021. So that's my understanding for the land part of the rent relief. And then for the tenants, again, as long as they provide evidence and they qualify, they can also tap into the government's assistance if they're finding difficulty in paying their rent.
And how are you finding it? So that's from a sales perspective. Obviously, the inquiry, as you said, the quantity is kind of diminished a little, but the quality's there, right?
Definitely.
How are you how long have you been in the industry for now? It's
coming up to 20 years now.
So you would have seen quite a few property cycles, right?
Well, that's it, and that's maybe why even right now, as challenging as it is, to me it's all about opportunities. Again, that old adage that from adversity comes opportunity. I've reminded a number of people recently that, again, only about 9 months ago, the market was quite depressed. We had the election, and then all of a sudden things literally turned around overnight. And from having buyers talking about how dire circumstances were, how the market was going to weaken and price was going to continue to go lower, all of a sudden we got certainty, we got clarity, and straight away the market bounced back. Within 3 months, we were probably back to where we were 2 or 3 years ago. So, it's not the first time we've seen these sort of cycles, and people forget that the market's always going to have peaks and troughs. And people only look at the market in the short term.
It's interesting, you hit a really good point there, Angelos. When you look at the media, and the one thing that I suppose disappoints me with the media's perception of the market, they always give you a short-term view, right? And I think people forget this, whether you're a homeowner or especially an investor. You pick up any media commentary and they tell you what's happened in the last 3 months. And I'm like, I don't really give a shit what's happened in the last 3 months. Property's a long-term play.
Of course.
Right? And I think, so a lot of the time the information is miscued because they're like, oh my God, property prices dropped in the last quarter. I'm like, duh. There's property cycles, right? So you've got to take a long-term view. And it's funny you mention that because some of my as an investor myself, some of my best purchases, in fact, my best purchases have always been in a depressed market or at a time when no one else is buying. I have this rule where I always try and buy real estate around Christmas time, right? Because everybody goes away and I got less competition.
Mm-hmm.
So I find that I'm not fighting as many other offers. With a property with a property management space, like, are you finding a lot, because you're at the top end of town out there in Elsternwick, are you finding a lot of concern in that area? Like,
Look, I think definitely, as you say, well, taking a step back about the media, without being cynical, I've always been a big believer of that old adage that bad news sells. So the media will always sensationalise things and try and make things look a lot worse than what they really are.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or, as you say, those headlines, which get people's attention. But to date, I'm pleased to say that, at least from a business owner's point of view, and also from our client's point of view as managing properties, we've had a very small, amount of tenants saying that they're finding difficulty.
Yeah.
But it's been probably less than 5%.
Yeah.
But
like, you'd almost find that in that space, even outside of these current conditions.
Yeah, I think
it's so small.
Of course it is. I mean, look, again, there's individual circumstances, and of course there's markets within markets, and there's also different demographics. But I think generally speaking, if you're investing in, well, as we always say, the principles of good real estate, and you're buying in a good location, the property is of good quality, you usually shouldn't have too much difficulty. And you've got a good property manager as well that is qualified and vetted and found you a tenant of good character. The chances of things unwinding for you in a negative sense.
Yeah. It's actually, you make a good point there, Angelos. Like, property management, from my viewpoint, is probably one of the most important parts of building
it's critical.
An investment portfolio. And I've always been, I always look at people out there and, the criteria they use to find a property manager is so flawed, in my opinion. They'll usually go to the one that's closest to them, or the one that can promise them the most rent, or charge
or the cheapest
fees, right? And I know that never works, and there's always going to be some heartache down the track there. But tell me about what you define. Like, if I'm an investor, right, and I'm buying property in your area, why would I come to you as a property manager? What do you guys, as a property management entity, what do you guys do differently than the rest?
Of course. Well, the overriding philosophy that we have in the office, and this is for myself and my other two fellow directors, is that we're always promoting the property management side of the business from the point of view of growing your asset.
Yeah.
It's not just purely collecting rent or making sure that the tenant pays on time, but it's about managing a holistic approach. And what I mean by that is, first and foremost, I've got a philosophy which I've said to plenty of my clients. I will always promote a tenant who is of greater character, even if they're offering less amount of rent, rather than one that wants to pay you top dollar, but we can't verify their credentials, or we're not certain of the quality of person that they are, because in the long run, a quality tenant, a reliable tenant, and one that will basically look after the property, adds value to the whole experience. Because you're not going to, you might get $1,000 more off from a tenant who wants to pay you $10 or $20 a week more than the next person. But if at the end of the lease you find that they've caused tens of thousands of dollars worth of damage to the property, you're going backwards in a hurry.
Yeah. And are you guys now, as property managers, you're looking at things much closer right now, given employment and people's industry? So I'm a tenant. I come to you and I say, hey, want to rent out this property here. What's the process that you would go through now, given the current environment?
Of course. Well, look, of course they have to apply.
Yeah.
And through the application, it also talks about their employment history, references, financial ability. And we vet all that very closely, obviously within the confines of privacy legislation, but we can ascertain a lot of information. And then we will always promote to our landlords who we think is the best calibre or the highest calibre of tenant. And as I say, quite often it may be somebody that's actually offering a little bit less than the asking rent, rather than
absolutely,
because as a package they are the better proposition than somebody that just on paper is paying you what you want, but you're going to lose in the future. So it's about looking at the tenants individually, their circumstances, and whether we believe, based on all the information that we can gather, that they're going to be the best fit for the property for the longer term.
Yeah. I agree. It's interesting because I have sometimes a unique viewpoint on property management, like having a decent portfolio myself. I always look at my tenant from the view that it's their home, not their they're not renting there.
No, that's where they live.
It's their home.
Exactly.
And I always encourage my landlords, don't just treat these people like a number and just somebody that just cash register that pays you money every month. I've always had that view of let them feel like it's their home. Like it's not my home, their home. Let them hang pictures where they want to hang. Let them do what they want to do, maintain the garden. Like it's their home.
Yes.
I stay away from them having to call me all the time from, hey, can I put that up on the wall or can I make changes to this? And I find that approach, my tenants stay there much, 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 much longer because they actually really feel like it's their home and they're not just living in someone else's home. I mean, is that the philosophy you guys?
Very much so.
Yeah.
So we want to find people who are invested, if you like, in the whole sanctuary of their home space. And the more, well, within reason, of course, but the more that you empower a tenant to feel like that is their safe place, that is their permanent residence, the better chance you have of having a good ongoing relationship and a successful investment. I think you need to have a good relationship with your tenant, and that's one of the things as well that, as you said, I think a distinct, unique proposition. We're very proud to say that our property management team, we've got 6 in total. Now, apart from a cadet who's been with us for 6 months, the rest of the girls, the minimum period that they've been with us is for 5 years and longer. Phenomenal. Whereas property management tends to have a real history of turnover, and that is one thing that you hear from plenty of landlords. I've been dealing with this property manager. In 6 months' time, I'm dealing with a different one. They don't know the history of the property. They don't have a connection with the tenant. And even something which quite often landlords find surprising is after a year, rather than, which obviously is beneficial for a real estate agent to say, well, okay, let's re-sign the tenant again, because of course there's some extra fees there for us to collect as well by going through another tenancy agreement. We'll quite often say if the tenant is not making any noises for moving, just let the tenancy go to a month by month, or what we call a periodic tenancy. Yes, I know from a landlord's point of view, it doesn't give you certainty that they're locked in for another year. However, experience has shown us that as long as they're not indicating they want to move, if you don't lock them in for another year, invariably, for the vast majority, they end up staying there for years afterwards. At the moment that you actually try to lock them in for another year, it tends to frighten them. It tends to make them think that their options of relocating are minimised, and quite often it actually acts as a trigger for them to move rather than to stay. Whereas if you just don't upset the apple cart, as long as, of course, they're good tenants, they're paying on time, they're maintaining the property, and the relationship is progressing positively, quite often you've got a better chance of keeping a good quality tenant there for a longer period by not asking them to recommit to another year. Just let them go month by month. And on the majority of instances, we find that works out a lot better for our landlords as well.
Yeah, no, I agree, because I've got a few tenants like that myself. And I think that's the really important thing of having a great relationship. I mean, we're in the people business. People forget this, okay? It's not real estate. It ain't finance. It ain't transaction. We are in the people business. And I think as long as people can remember that we, at the end of the day, are human beings connecting and communicating an idea,
definitely,
where hopefully we can reach agreement. That's the bottom line. And, because I remember when I first got into real estate and I started looking at property, and I remember seeing all those freaking horror stories, like everybody else, right? It's the biggest fear for an investor is, oh, what if I trash my property? You know, the tenant from hell. And I got to admit, when I first started, that put a bit of fear into me as well. And it still does to a lot of people out there. But it was funny. I actually was one of these guys that investigated all those stories on the news as to, you know, why are those tenants out there? And I usually found that when I looked into it, most people who had grief with tenants, what they don't tell you is that they had no property manager. They chose to rent it. They chose to manage the property themselves. Or, in some instances, they probably had the wrong property manager. Yeah. And, you know, my message always to the landlords is have an incredible relationship with your property manager. Because right now, given what we're going through, and I'll bring it back to the current environment, you need to be flexible.
Of course you do.
You know, because, you know, landlords can have some challenges right now, more so, you know, with tenants, and tenants obviously can have some challenges more so with work and employment, which can put them in a sticky situation. So my message is always just stay in communication with people. And I think the government was saying that as well, like get the tenants and the landlords to communicate. So what would your message be, Angelos, to someone that came knocking on the door and said, hey, listen, Angelos, I'm looking to invest in the area right now, but I'm a bit concerned because I'm with you. There are incredible buying opportunities out there, and the smart people know that. You know, look at interest rates where they are right now. Right? Where do you see them going moving forward?
Well, Anthony, I think history has shown us that the most successful people tend to zig while everybody else is zagging.
Do you read that book as well? You kidding me?
Yeah,
Was it Simon Reynolds?
I think that's it. Yes. Yeah.
What a great book. Huh?
Well, even I think even Warren Buffett. I think that's his philosophy. You know, he's always like buying when everybody else is selling. Yeah. You know, keep your head while everybody else around you loses theirs. Yep. And as I've said to plenty of people right now, well, and without being facetious, you can choose. You can either say, well, okay, this is all too hard. I'm going to sit on my hands and just wait until things improve. Or you can say, well, we still live in the best country in the world. You know, the sun's still going up and coming down. You know, it's not like we've got a war. Yeah, okay, yes, we've got a challenge, but there's opportunities there as well. And if, this is the time where rather than competing with the herd, this is the chance to get out there and say, well, okay. But coming back to what you said, Anthony, in terms of what would be the fundamentals, I don't think that's ever changed. You know, make sure that if you're going to invest in property, location, position, the 3 P's of real estate is always position first and foremost. Yeah. I think people's lifestyles, irrespective of lockdowns or any other circumstances, people still want amenity. Yeah. People still want convenience. Yeah. So look to buy a property that is well connected and well located to, shopping, cafes, transportation, schooling, parks, all the things that people desire. And then from there, especially as an investment, at least go for a quality property, one that's going to be, ideally have some redeeming features, or one that's going to be appealing. And there is an old philosophy that you should only buy property to rent that you would live in yourself as well. Now, I don't necessarily subscribe to that wholeheartedly because, again, you shouldn't use your own personal preferences as the ultimate criteria of whether you're buying an investment property or not. But I think as long as the quality of the dwelling is attractive and appealing, and the position, the location is going to be convenient, it should not be too hard to attract a tenant. Yeah, absolutely. The fundamentals never change, and it's interesting. You know what I've seen with buyers out there, in studying this, being in the industry myself for 20 years. People always, the people that are ready to buy, or really want to make a go of this, they never let anything like this stop them. And the people that are on the fence, it doesn't matter what the economy's doing. They always use an excuse. Of course. Like right now they'll say there's uncertainty and I'm not sure about my job and blah, 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 all that stuff, right? Then when the market's taking off, they're like, it's overpriced. Exactly.
Yeah. And I'm like, guys, you're never going to do anything, right?
Well, nobody rings a bell when the market turns, because people say, I want to buy when the market hits the bottom. How do you ever know? Yeah. You'll only find out 6 months later, and then 6 months too late because the price have taken off again, and then you're chasing your tail. Yeah, because I think, and this is again, it's not a slur on Australians, but Jesus, it's if they don't see it on the front page of the Herald Sun or the Age, they don't make a move. Well, you've got the history and the experience as I do, and it's when people say to me, "Oh, but if I buy now, what happens if interest rates go up by, 1%, 2%?" And I'm saying, well,
Fix them.
Well, A, fix them, and B, if 1 or 2% difference in interest rates is going to impact upon your purchasing decision, you shouldn't be buying in the first place.
Yeah.
You should be able to have that already factored into your ability to service the loan, and especially when, if you're as old as I am and you even remember the late 80s, early 90s when interest rates were 18, 19%, the first property I bought, I'm sure I was paying about 18% interest, which, people are now talking about, 2.5%, 3%. Please, that's...
It's ridiculous. I look at it, I'm like with you, man. I take 4%. I would take, if somebody said to me, Anthony, I'll give you 4%, even 5%.
Exactly.
For the rest of your life. I'll take it.
Of course you would.
I'll take it. Because I've had that experience. Like I did 13%. I bought this ripping, from your boys out in St Kilda West.
Okay.
On Lock Street there.
Uh-huh.
I
spot.
Great spot, right? And I bought this little two-bedder there in Lock Street, and I paid 13% for that. And I looked at it and I thought, I'd done my homework and was speaking to your guys. Walk to the beach, Fitzroy Street around the corner, talking about amenities, right? Ridiculous, nice day, walk into the city. And I thought, it's going to cost me 13%. But when I look at the benefit and the gain right now, I would have paid 15, 16, 17%.
Of course.
And I think people get caught up in interest rate, like what I find with the real smart investors, the real switched on ones that are building long-term wealth. Interest rate is the last thing they look at.
Exactly.
And because banks are very, very cheeky. We love them, but interest rate is always the distraction.
Well, look, as I've always said to plenty of people when they're buying, the most critical thing is, do you have the capacity to service the loan? Because people say, well, what happens if the market turns on me? What happens if, the prices go down?
Yeah.
Well, unless you're a property flipper, in other words, you're just buying property for short term and you're hoping to buy it cheap and then on-sell it very quickly for a profit, well, then, you're a very, unique animal and somebody who's very speculative. But for at least somebody who's looking to, I believe, grow long-term wealth, I think you need to look at real estate on a medium to longer-term horizon.
Yeah.
And anybody who is buying real estate and who's not intending to hold it for at least 5 years, if not ideally 7 to 10.
Yeah, absolutely.
You are taking a bit of a risk. But history and evidence has shown us that as long as you're holding onto the real estate for at least 5 years and ideally 7 to 10 years, you will invariably make a very attractive level of growth, make a very good capital gain, and especially if it's quality real estate that's good location, the actual property itself is of good quality. It's very rarely will you lose.
Mate, they're winding me up here, but I'm in my head. I'm thinking I'm having a blast here, man, because I
glad for punishment.
I get to learn so much, from you never have the viewpoint that you know everything. Well, that's excellent, Angelos. Thanks for
it's a pleasure
for coming in, man, because it's an area that we haven't touched on yet with our clients and with our investors, but such an important part of building wealth is having a good team of people around you. And I've always said that you can't achieve this on your own. It's impossible to actually achieve this on your own because for a lot of people, time does not permit. And
also the complexities.
Correct.
The regulations.
Yeah, and it's forever changing. So before I let you go, mate, any last words of wisdom?
Words of wisdom. Well, I think...
any final thoughts on where we're at right now? Where you I know no one's got a crystal ball. I get that. But, again, I'm starting to see some real positivity out there. Yep. Look at other parts of the world.
Exactly.
What do you see moving forward?
Well, look, I think in a nutshell, I'd say that for at least the moment, consolidation is probably the key for a lot of people. However, if you are in a good financial position, and especially if you're if you've got employment prospects that aren't at risk right now, and there is, as we said, as much as a lot of people are doing it tough, there are a lot of other people right now that are actually, profiting and having great success because of the new opportunities that these challenges have presented to us. So I would be seeing this as an opportunity to acquire real estate at potentially what will be really good value. And as long as you've got a medium to longer term perspective, just put it in your asset portfolio and in years to come. And as you say, rather than just a short term thing of what's going to happen in the next 1 to 3 months, take a 3, 5, 10-year time frame. And when you look back, you're going to be one of the few that's going to be saying, I was one of the clever ones, while everybody else was saying it was gloom and doom.
Couldn't agree more. Angelos, Stefanis, thank you so much for joining us today. Wish you, Biggin and Scott, you guys have an incredible brand. I've been a fan of your brand for a long, long time. You guys have helped me out a lot, and I know you do amazing things out in your way of the woods. So thank you for joining us and sharing this with us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Anthony.